get cases in family court where it might be a couple that have come together and each of them have got children from a previous relationship, and one of the parents is now being stopped from seeing the child or children that they've got together, but they're still looking after their other children, and they didn't have a problem in that previous relationship in terms of domestic abuse. It's just in this one, and you've got courts and CAFCAS and what have you making a ruling that a father is dangerous for that child but not for those children, or a mother, and you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I even watched a video of a case today where this poor guy, he's raised three children single-handed on his own. He's got one with somebody else and he's not seen them for several years, and he's had over 200 allegations made against him, and the court has stopped him seeing, they won't even let him have indirect contact. And you're like, well, this is an oxymoron,
Yeah.
How are you saying that I'm a danger to that one, but I'm not a danger to those ones? So really that just fuels the view in me that it's really just a pantomime. There can only be one reason why, because it's either blind stupidity or it's corruption, and I've yet to meet anybody in family law that I consider to be blind stupid.
Mm. And therein lies the problem, which then begs the question, what are we going to do about it?
On a train, in a bus, in a car, on the way to your job. All alone with your kids, with your wife, or with your dog. You can listen anywhere, you can listen everywhere, to the Philip Maloney podcast.
Hi, welcome back to the latest instalment of the Philip Maloney podcast. I'm very happy to be joined today by Brian Hudson. Brian Hudson is one of group members that I follow on Facebook, but he's also a lot more than that. I would sort of describe him as an activist at present, and I think that he's got a compelling story in regards to areas of family court, the child maintenance service, as well as some of the judicial decisions that are quite poignant at the moment. So I welcome Brian Hudson.
Thanks, Philip. Thanks for reaching out. It's good to see you.
Yeah, no problem at all. So here we are on a Sunday evening. Putting aside any technical issues, we've managed to find some time in our mutual diaries where we can sit down and have a really good conversation around some of our areas of mutual interest.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, great stuff. So Brian, I thought what I'd like to do with all my guests is just get to know you a little bit before we jump into the real nitty-gritty there. So can you tell me a little bit about your background? I'm always fascinated by sort of childhoods and people, how they grew up, and what their environments were like in their sort of earlier years.
Yeah, so I grew up in London. I've got a brother, so my parents raised us in North London. Mum and dad are now over in Ireland. My brother's over there as well. Mum's Irish, dad's English. Bit of Swedish descent in there, so there's a little bit of Viking in me.
I can see that.
So grew up in Finsbury Park. I had a pretty steady childhood. Nothing terribly dramatic in my childhood. My mum and dad are still together, obviously. Our own childhood was really reliable. I got into sport when I was around about 13. I was quite a chubby young lad before that, and took up trampolining after being kind of bullied at school and getting fed up of being bullied at school, and that took me on a wonderful journey. I was absolutely useless at it to begin with, but I loved it and saw these other kids doing amazing stuff at the Michael Sobel Centre, which was close to me. and I was desperate to be able to do that. So I just would run through brick walls to be able to find a way to be as good as them. And that kind of gradually got me more and more athletic. And by the time I was kind of 16, I was on the national circuit, and at 18 I made it into the British youth team. And
wow.
by 22 I made it to the senior world championship team. And the next few years took me around the world. So I've done 3 world championships and various other international tournaments. And I'd credit that really with putting me on a pathway to being able to do anything I set my mind to. Really, I had a wonderful set of coaches, for over the entire of my career, which lasted till I was 29. 4 different coaches who, shaped me essentially, and gave all of us, me and my teammates, gave us all, a wonderful gift of their time and their skill and their persistence with us, and putting up with us and driving us around the country and flying around the world with us. So once that career was over, that kind of coincided with my first child coming along. I had to, the reality of having to get a job hit home. The kids were kicking my ass anyway, and I was spending more time at the physio than I was training. So, reality dawned.
Yeah.
And that
trampoline caught up with you.
Yeah, I mean, while I was doing sport, I just worked in, I had a part-time job working for a physical therapist on Harley Street. Before that, I had just done jobs to pay the bills so that I could get around the world. So I was a lifeguard. I coached trampolining a bit. I taught swimming a bit. And I also, in my training, I also trained with a wonderful group of athletes at Willesden Sports Centre in London. That was really another great part of the journey. Then I ended up by sort of fluke really working for a cable TV company and doing customer service. Really got to learn the whole of that business through doing that, and then worked in sales part-time while I was still carrying on trampolining. But as trampolining came to an end, I needed to find some sort of career. All of my peers, had worked up the ladder while I was, flying around the world, not particularly worried about career. And I kind of found it quite difficult to work for other people, because I would always sort of see what they're doing that could be better. And, people don't really like being told that what they're doing isn't the best thing. And so I found that pretty quickly I wanted to do what they were doing for myself. And that kind of led me into setting up a telecoms company, ultimately, just from a bedroom at home. And at the time, the telecoms industry was only just sort of deregulating from everything being BT, and there was an awful lot of opportunity there. After about a year, one of my close friends came to join me with that. And over the next 20 years, that company was built up to having 30 people and several £1 million turnover. And then things went to get, got a little bit, they started going a little bit skew-whiff when I got married, really. Now I'm here.
Yeah. So, and that's where our sort of paths cross, I suppose. Not too long after that, I guess, into this sort of real. It's almost a bit of a mystery, really, when we look at these sort of situations people find themselves in regards to sort of divorce, marriage, kids, family courts, parental alienation, etc. But you've painted a really good picture of who you are, where you've come from, building up a business, the way you see sort of opportunities, perhaps, and the way you then apply yourself, right, through either your trampolining, and there must have been some tenacity within you to go from the bedroom guy with an idea to, what did you say, like a multi-million-pound company, was it?
Yeah, I mean, at our peak, we were turning over 3.5 million, and we had 30 people, and it was blast. It was, it was a real privilege, really. I got to the point where I didn't really have to do much of the hard grind. There were other people really doing all the hard work, and you don't, at the time, I don't think I really appreciated just how lucky I was to have that level of resource at my disposal, not really needing to work. In the middle of that, I started doing some sort of philanthropic type stuff. So I took over a local authority, a failed local authority sports centre, and with a close friend from trampolining, and we revamped that. But that turned sour. We revamped it. We increased the membership by 700 over the space, 700% over the space of a year, and it was really thriving. But then the financial crash came about, and I couldn't get a mortgage to continue to complete the deal from the council, and they ended up stealing it off me and my partner that I'd gone into the venture with. So I long held a desire to contribute to society in some way anyway, and I at the time I had a vehicle to do that and to help me do that. So I really understood the power that being successful in business can, even moderately, can give you. When you can generate finances, you can really start to have an impact, albeit just at a local level, and that's something that still kind of have a burning desire to do at some stage. Be able to do something that is in sport that it really contributes to a community in some way.
Yeah, that's certainly a great way to think and be. I mean, to be at the service of your society is, it's a very noble endeavour. So, I mean, you raise a pretty good point there, and I think we're going to go into more detail around it. Is you need money to make things work, right? We need mortgages, you need finance, you need all of these aspects. So it's not just enough to have a clever idea if you can't sell that clever idea, and if you can't get buy-in on that clever idea. I mean, would you say that was a vital, important aspect of any organisation, any idea, any sort of little?
I mean, it's the critical thing that I notice in all the campaigning that's happening on the parental alienation campaigning side of the fence, if you like, is the complete absence of funding. And there's lots and lots of disparate groups who typically aren't working terribly well together, and some of them seem to be actually causing harm, but none of the common denominator is none of them have any money. They have lots of people needing help, lots of people seemingly willing to give their skills, time and expertise and passion to try and resolve things, but there's a distinct lack of investment. And part of that is because there's so many people perhaps who have been broken by the system financially anyway, so where they otherwise might contribute financially, they just don't have the means to do it anymore. So I think there's room for a different approach, for sure, and that's something that I'd like to try and address. I'm working on a plan to try and address that now.
Yeah,
but just at the very early stages of it.
I want to get into a lot of detail around that, but first I want to ask you a fairly direct question. What sort of threat do you think is posed by the justice system around family law as it currently stands?
I think it's the most destructive thing that's happening in our society right now. And when I came into, I came into this arena, it's not by choice. I don't think any of us particularly choose to, and was really horrified, at the outset of what I was seeing. Initially, I guess I was a bit of a deer caught in the headlights, really bewildered by what was going on in my own case, only to find, the predatory family law system that appeared to be claiming to be doing things in the best interest of children, but the reality was, they were raiding the family estate. And decisions were being made that were so completely backwards that it was like being in the twilight zone. And when I look back over it now, it's still quite hard to believe everything that I've seen, heard, the decisions that have been made, the time it all takes, and the justifications for plainly ridiculous
what do you what do you mean by raiding the family estate? What does that phrase, open that up for me?
Well, I think that when you arrive in this arena, you're either a parent who is probably accusing the other parent of something, or you are a parent who is being accused of something. And on both sides of that, there's usually a lawyer, a divorce lawyer if you're married and you're one of you has applied for a divorce, or if it's a straightforward separation, then one of you at least will have a lawyer. And if there's both of you have got a lawyer, then those lawyers are earning their money, and much more of it if your fight is intense and if it is prolonged. And that seems to be what happens in pretty much every case I've ever come across, is that link to a professional being regulated. There is a solicitors regulation authority, but they aren't regulating. The judiciary is not accountable to anyone other than itself, so essentially it's not accountable.
So I was going to ask a follow-up to that. Obviously, if you've got this raiding of the family estate, obviously everybody's had issues with lawyers since lawyers began. Probably Greek times or what have you. But we've had lawyers for a very long time in many different societies. Do you see a difference between the lawyers for family court and like criminal court, or any other practices of law? Is there a distinction that you've highlighted?
Yeah, the only times I've come into contact with the legal profession outside of family law is conveyancing and buying houses, right? Is one of them, and that's really straightforward. It couldn't be easier, right? It's just mechanized and formulaic and mechanized, and you're filling out forms, and it's just a process. Okay. Yeah. Family law could actually be like that, and then the other is in business. contracts, and that's from my experience of it, it's been pretty similar. It's you need some legal advice on setting your contracts up, or a bespoke deal with a client, or something of that nature, or you've got some HR issues. So I've had some legal experience there with having staff and needing to lean on HR law and expertise there, and all of those seem pretty formulaic and straightforward, and aimed at resolution. But in family law, the lawyers appear to, not all of them, a great many of them, however, appear to want to do whatever is possible not to just reach an agreement for the best interests of the family. They don't have dispute resolution skills, and you've got two sets of lawyers throwing spears at each other on your behalf and charging you a lot of money for it, and making, one side making outrageous demands and the other one saying I can't meet those outrageous demands, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. And you even get to stages where some of the communications are so trivial and petty, and you're paying hundreds of pounds for every email, and it's quite clear that when you're on the receiving end of allegations, it's quite clear that everything possible is being done to make you feel that you have to give in and just feel a level of fear, essentially, that will result in a better outcome for their client. And what's missing is from people in this profession, seemingly, is their ability to picture their respective clients after this separation, after the lawyers step away, when the court aren't involved anymore, and when they've got to be able to raise these children. That seems to be completely absent for the most part. And I find that really disturbing. That at parents' most vulnerable time, and their children therefore their most vulnerable time, that you would have a predatory family law system that we hear jokes about it all the time. Divorce lawyers are universally hated, aren't they? And they've earned that. What's really disturbing, however, is that the Ministry of Justice, the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and the government generally have not tackled it.
Yeah.
The societal outcomes are so severe and they've not tackled it. What's the reason behind that? It can't be because it's not tackleable, because they tackle so many other things with seemingly comparative ease. But in family law, that seems to be impossible. So what is the reasoning behind that? There has to be a vested interest reason behind that, because nobody in their right mind would want families to go through this sort of pain. There has to be some other reason.
So you wouldn't, well, maybe you would, but would you possibly sort of see that we've come through this and it's become the norm for these outcomes to just be accepted? Like, do you think society are just kind of beaten down by the inevitability of a failed system that nobody's been able to fix?
I don't. I think that there's been no shortage of protesting for, you go look at Families Need Fathers. They've been around for more than 40 years. They're not terribly effective today, but, at times in their existence, they've been pretty damn vocal. Look at Fathers for Justice. They've been extremely vocal, and high profile protesting. I think that those that are involved in campaigning, really try to be heard. And those who go through this, which is an extraordinarily high percentage of separating parents now, it's almost the default. But we're silenced essentially because there is a secret family court system that will prevent this going into the media in any meaningful way, and therefore they can run riot. Really, they can get away with whatever they want to. And all we've seen through all of the protesting is more and more ways dreamt up as to solidify the position, under the guise of, or under the pretense that it's some form of reform. And every form of reform that we've seen has led to a increase in the number of cases, and a lengthening in the time it takes to deal with them, and an increase in the number of cases with allegations of abuse or violence. And we're seeing social outcomes that are really, really tragic. and not being connected.
So with the
connections are obvious, they're there for us to see, and I've identified them in the reports that I've done that we'll go through in a little while. But if you have financial vested interest driving anything, you're going to get corruption.
Yeah. So I want to ask you to sort of just unpick this, if you wouldn't mind, briefly, or take your time on it. But where we have because you referred to it there, the secret family courts. So if you have the secret family courts, what is a justifiable reason for them to be secret, and what is the unjustifiable reason for them to be secret, i.e. what are the outcomes that are so abhorrent and deplorable that secrecy should be superseded for the reasons that they give?
So secrecy would be justified to protect the children of the family, right? As the priority. And I think everyone gets that. You don't want individual children to be identified in the press as having gone through anything in particular, or their parents behaving in any particular way. But it's really become this cloak. So I think from that angle, it's justified. But what isn't justified is secrecy around all of the data that they collect. And there is secrecy around that data. So what that data tells us, and it's perfectly fine to anonymize it, because that's where most of the value is, actually, in understanding, what are the trends today, why is our caseload changing in the way that it is, why do cases take longer, what are the actual outcomes. You can't even get Ministry of Justice to tell us gender splits in terms of case outcomes. There are all sorts of things they can be measuring, and they don't measure actually how many cases in terms of publishing it are repeat offenders. They're back to court and back to court and back to court. We've got, it takes a freedom of information request to find out how many orders have been breached, subsequently applied to enforce them, only to find out how many of those breached orders do get enforced. And the fact is, when you do get that information, it's so alarming that it's 0.5% of when a parent has an order for contact breached, the Ministry of Justice will enforce the order that's been breached 0.5% of the time. And that's, we're talking nearly 10,000 applications a year, right? And we're down in, we're barely making it into double digits in terms of the number that they will enforce. So for me, that's a fraud, because you're selling something and you're not delivering a service. You're taking a fee from the applicants. They think that they think that a court order is there, to be in order to keep the parents behaving themselves to some degree, and ensure that they will be able to play a part in their children's lives, and the court won't enforce it. So you have to wonder why they went to court in the first place and why they went back. Essentially that amounts to mis-selling, doesn't it?
Yeah, I wouldn't like to have bought that mobile phone. Let's say if that was a mobile phone and it said,
if you knew it had 0.5% chance of working, you wouldn't buy it, right?
Yeah. Bad deal.
Yeah.
And what's the average case load? What's the average cost?
if 200 odd quid, just to make an application, and then you put all your legal fees on top. If you can afford to hire a lawyer, a lot of people are just representing themselves now, or they start with a lawyer and they get their funds get exhausted pretty quickly, and then they resort to having to guide them, navigate their own way through the system, and cope with the various dirty trick tactics that the other side might deploy to derail their case, that never get addressed. So, it's really what I really discovered is ultimately in all of the hearings that I had is it's just one big long pantomime, and this story evolves, and rocks are going back and forth, and then finally you'll represent yourself, you'll put forward the truth, you'll spend an awful lot of time and effort and sleepless nights preparing your case, and you'll be lucky if they read it. And if they do read it, they don't actually care anyway, because they're just going to make a decision that doesn't make an awful lot of sense. And we drag in these professionals, and we expose the children to them, which in and of itself is fairly dysfunctional in most cases. If most of these cases have got allegations of abuse, of course they're obliged to check into what's going on with the children and see if there's any grounds to these allegations that have been made. But if you had a set of boundaries that we were all adhering to when we separate, and if you removed the incentives, the financial incentives, for one parent to be the victor, if you like, using the children as their weapon of choice, then the vast majority of cases would never go to court. The parent would just settle things outside of court, just like they do in Sweden. It's very rare that parents will go to family court in Sweden. Over here, most of them will.
So it's not as accepted over in Sweden. And I take it, Brian, that you've probably got some data around that.
Yeah, I mean, Sweden had the same problem as we did until they brought in shared parenting as the default, and that's changed everything, But the industry over here is fighting tooth and nail to prevent that from happening.
I wonder why.
The only reason can be that the industry would shrink by 80% overnight. Right. And an awful lot of people who are getting very wealthy off the back of this misery wouldn't have a job in this industry. They would have to go and do something that's actually productive. And it's highly unlikely from the caliber of people that I've met in this industry, it's highly unlikely that they could earn anything like what they're earning by raiding family estates.
It sounds like, from what you're describing, it sounds like family law should be sold in a generic packet behind a counter, behind a screen, with a wrap that says smoking kills. It sounds like family law is like the tobacco industry.
Yeah, I mean, it needs a health warning for sure. It needs a health warning.
It sounds, I mean, because these are the same sort of murmurs that happened before the tobacco industry had to, come clean about the destruction of smoking. The family court is here, and it's causing such destruction and death in society, but they're making so much money on it, nobody wants to stop it.
Yeah, well, you look at the legal services industry around family law and Ministry of Justice, and then you look at the domestic abuse industry that has really scaled up in recent years, and they're the two entities, if you like, that have all the funding. Women's Aid, for example, is pushing around about $500 million in funding across the 180 or so federated charities that are linked to it in the country. And Lord knows how much money the family law industry is turning over. But, it's many billions. And, they're the ones that have got the deep pockets to carry out, in quotes, research. And when you read through that research, that it's come through a gendered lens. That it has actually been done specifically in order to try to shield any further erosion from what they've managed to carve out as a system that is given the rubber stamp to raid family estates. Now, we're starting to get there in terms of campaigning here. I've been doing a lot of that work, lifting up stones to really look at the data sets that are out there outside of family law, to give us an indication as to what the impact of family law is on society, because it's so difficult to get information from the Ministry of Justice. They will shield it under the under the pretense that it's against the public interest, or it takes them too long.
Right. So on this podcast, let's have a good look at them. Let's have a really good look at all of those areas that you're talking about. So if you're happy to, I think it's a good time now to let's get into the nuts and bolts of this conversation in regards to that. So from here. So Brian, please, if you could explain what we're looking at now.
Okay, so you'll have to excuse my design skills, but I knocked up this infographic taking stats that I'd calculated from a report that I've written, and we can put a link to this and to the actual report when you post this video up to help any viewers if they'd like to read it. But if I start going through some of these, what you notice first of all, and what was immediately apparent to me in doing the research, was what you see in these arrows here. You've got competing factors. What we're seeing in society is child mental health disorders have risen between 2002 and 2018 by 37%, and suicides have risen by 28% between 2008 and 2019. And in similar time frame, 2005 to 2019, we've seen an increase in family court cases. But contrasting to this, we're seeing forces that should be pushing these down. What we're seeing is the marriage rate has dropped when the bride is 44 and under, which are typically your childbearing years, right? So that's dropped by 20%. We've seen the birth rate, drop by 12%. We've seen the divorce rate drop by 37%. And we've also seen domestic abuse police reports to the police drop by 30%. So you've got all of these factors driving down, and yet family law is driving up, and substantially so. The growth of cases is about 5% or so every year. And you've got to start lifting up rocks to understand why, what's behind this.
So those are quite alarming statistics. Thank you for breaking those down like that. That's it speaks volumes, really.
Well, if I take you then, if I come from here and I take you over to this here, this is essentially mapping forward where this arrow is headed. What happens in the coming years if this continues, and you map this growth rate forward to 2038, and whereas over here right now, 20% of all children will go through family court process or be subject to a family court process in their childhood. It's actually more than that now. But by 2038, it will be half of all children during their childhood will be subject of a family court drama with their parents.
So in 2038, so we're talking about 17 years time. So if you have a child tomorrow, that child will grow into his or her relationship years with the projection of 1 in 2.
It will be more likely than not that their parents will separate and take them through a family court drama. Sorry, if their parents, it's more likely than not that they will have a family court drama. No, hold on, that's wrong. because I map that on all children. So with the growth in cases, what I also found is that there's now almost total saturation of parents who are divorcing rather than just separating. So where they're married and they're ending the marriage, what we're seeing is that 88% of those parents will turn to family court.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a definite link. You're more likely to go to family court to battle for custody of your children if you've been married. And what would be the reason for that? Well, it would be that there's a family estate. You know, you're wedded, and there is a financial incentive essentially, because the money follows the children. Okay. So there is your incentive. The money follows the children. Whoever has the children more than the other will have a case for having a greater slice of the family estate, is more likely to be able to keep the family home, or if it's liquidated, to have the proceeds. And that will be the first thing that you're told, particularly if you are mum and you go to see a divorce lawyer. And you know, most divorces are initiated by mothers, by women. I think it's about 80%. So you know, that first bit of advice is crucial. You know, and if that advice is, you know, along the lines of, I can get you more if you do this, then you get what we're seeing today. And if you compare that to Sweden, where they have only 9% of families going to family court, but I'm being very generous with that 9% because it includes all family separation matters, including financial, and actually in reality their families going to court over child arrangements is around about 2%.
Right.
So we're talking 44 times over here, and simply because it's the norm now in Sweden, when parents separate, for them to share parenting roughly equally, and they just get on with it. And there is no financial incentive for one parent to have more care of the children than the other. You know, the system recognizes that both parents need to be housed and need to be functioning well to deliver parenting, and you don't get that over here if one parent is being essentially put in a position where, you know, they can't afford somewhere to live. They can't afford to get themselves to work, perhaps, you know, and that's how far it goes. But if we go back to the stats here, you know, right now we've got well over 100,000. I think the last reports with CAFCAS this last year was 105,000 children going through in private family law cases. There's another 40 odd thousand in public law, but 100,000 children, and you know, subject to these cases. And you know, the vast majority of them are there because the parents are battling it out. So there's likely to be some form of weaponization of those children, and parental alienation is very likely to be present. You know, that's 20% of our kids growing up. You know, you map that to the birth rate. The birth rate every year is about 600,000, but it's dropping all the time, as I said over here. You know, it's dropping all the time, but the industry keeps pushing and pushing and pushing, and you've got this, you know, domestic abuse industry that's looking to procure more and more victims. As the more victims they've got, the more. I
think that's a fair way to put it.
You know, so that's how I refer to it. You know, it's procurement as far as I'm concerned, and the for what constitutes abuse seem to be falling. You know, the bar, I should say, as to what constitutes abuse seems to be becoming lower and lower and lower.
Yeah.
Such that if you offend somebody, then you've been abusive to them. You know.
Yeah.
So
any shouting to shouting at children, disciplining children. Providing boundaries.
Exactly, and you end up in this space. If you're a targeted parent, you end up in this space where you're actually almost afraid to parent effectively in case it's used against you. And how dysfunctional is that? So you can end up with children becoming feral because you daren't put in any boundaries to their behavior in case it becomes reported as abuse. And I've certainly felt that pressure. So where children end up being adultified by it.
Yes, that's a very good point, because obviously where you've got the so if you're a man walking into the family courts, you are fucked. If you're a woman walking into family courts, you might be seen to be the person who's just going to get everything going your way. But once you sort of open that Pandora's box, you've got a multitude of issues to face over a longer period of time. Once that family court door closes, and you're left then with the children after showing, after providing these allegations, etc., in order to push up, the stats in the red arrow. You've then got children who are looking at you and saying, well, I can do what I want, and I cannot. I don't have to do what you like. I don't have to play nicely now because you've already got rid of daddy, or you've already got rid of mummy, like however you want to say it. But the majority of cases is you've got rid of daddy. I don't have to play ball.
I think for a parent that is preventing the other from having access, I think it ends up causing them problems as well, right? Because these kids are all over the place, right? So the reality of parenting those children, once you've ousted, if you're the parent that's ousted the other, is that parenting becomes all the more difficult anyway, because they do want to see the other parent, but they're either scared of asking, they're trying to manage that parent's emotions, and therefore that's going to manifest itself in their behavior in other ways. It might lead to eating disorders, it might lead to disobedience at school, or worse,
risk taking, promiscuity, drug and alcohol abuse, mental health problems.
I think they're the long-term outcomes of it. But in the moment, when the children they're subject to the actual alienating behaviors, and they're not able to love that parent maybe has just been, they don't know where they are. They were formerly close to them. They're like, well, where's my dad, or where's my mum? And that, I saw that manifest itself in some pretty shocking behavior at school, that was really actually became quite dangerous for other children and some of the teachers. So you end up putting a lot of pressure in the rest of society. And then of course you have a child who's traumatized, who's acting out, who's then getting told off by everybody, because they're acting out, and they don't know really how to handle what's going on in their life.
You mentioned it there with the adultization of the children.
So I mean, in terms of the parents, so in my own particular experience, the time that I would have with my son, when he wasn't getting his own way, and he would essentially emotionally blackmail me by saying, well, my mum would give that to me, my mum would let me do this. I'm going to, at one point he said, I'm going to phone the police if you don't give me this. And you're like, well, this is a 6-year-old talking like this, and where's he getting that from? And when you're in that situation, you're just thinking, where's this going to lead to for him in terms of being a well-rounded and functional teen / adult? If he's getting this warped perspective of the world at this age, you know, how long can that continue for before it becomes just the way that he is, and that is just his belief system. And you know, that still worries me now, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, looking at some of these,
what are you going to get back after this process, after the children become adults?
Yeah, and he's the one that's going to have to deal with that, because it will be his life, right? You know, it will be his relationships that he has. It will be his risks that he takes, that might lead him into, you know, all sorts of danger that we can't know now, and all because we couldn't set some sensible boundaries in a family law system that says, right, when parents separate, this is the formula that we follow. You know, you'll both care for your children roughly equally, provided, you know, there aren't safety concerns or, you know, practicalities that we need to work out. And neither one of you are going to be left high and dry financially. We're going to split the assets and, you know, make financial arrangements that mean that both parents are in as good a position as is practical and possible under the circumstances, you know. And that isn't actually that difficult. It's an accounting exercise, right? You don't need to have a war in family court in order to do some accounting. Yeah. You know, you just need to get on with it, you know. And if the parents are struggling emotionally, let them get some counselling. There's plenty of counselling services available, but no one's going to mediation these days because it's just undermined. You know, one party won't turn up, you know. And, you know, is the answer to make it mandatory? Well, probably not, because let's just put some boundaries in place, you know, into the marriage license.
Yeah, two steps ahead. So, like, after they've been through that, let's just make that outcome very crystal clear as to what it's going to look like, and that's going to be a shared parenting contract.
If you're going to get married and have kids, this is what the formula when you separate, if you separate, will look like. Except for in these extreme circumstances, right? And if those extreme circumstances come about, and let's say that is along the lines of domestic violence, right? Woe betide you if you falsify that, you know, because that will be dealt with criminally. And, you know, I don't think there's anybody on this side of the lobbying argument that wouldn't want domestic, you know, genuine domestic abuse and domestic violence dealt with through the criminal court.
Absolutely.
I would want that to happen. Equally, I would also want to be able to know that were anything that I was accused of to have been dealt with in family court, that when it was proven that you know, those allegations were untrue, that there would be consequences for that, because without that there's no deterrent at all. And today there is no deterrent. There's no deterrent at all. You know, if you in family court, when there's been an accusation made and it's found to be untrue, nothing happens. You know, you accept you're probably made homeless.
What basis?
Job.
Sorry, yeah. What basis would it be found to be true in the family courts?
Occasionally they'll do. Yeah, I mean, occasionally they'll do a fact find. You know, I think maybe less than 5% of the time. You know, and the judge will ultimately be responsible for determining whether something did or didn't happen. And frankly, even if it did happen, if they find that it did happen, they still don't. You know, so potentially a perpetrator gets away with it because it's been dealt with in family court rather than criminally. And it's like, well, you know, if it's a big enough deal to stop that parent having contact with their children, then it's probably criminal and it should be dealt with in a criminal court. And if it's not a big enough deal to not go to criminal court, then it shouldn't be on the table. It shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So the parameters in the family court is the balance of probability, and the criminal court is beyond reasonable doubt, I suppose. Is that the differences?
Yeah, I mean that's so I guess in family court it often comes down to whether, you know, a judge prefers how the story that one parent gave versus another. And sometimes you can be accused of things that you can't evidence didn't happen. And my view is, if there's no evidence that it did happen, it probably didn't happen, right? And, certainly nobody should be punished for something that someone can't prove happened. And, if there's evidence that something happened that's genuine, then it should be put forward to a court, whether it's criminal or family law. And it shouldn't be a case of balance of probabilities. It's just, did it or didn't it happen? Like what is there to really say on balance about, if you're accusing somebody of doing something that you can't prove happened, there can't be a consequence for someone who's been accused of that. That's just fundamentally against the whole premise of our legal system, and the most frequent allegations that get made in family court are, serious sexual violence, right? They're, serious child abuse. These are things that should be investigated criminally by the police. That a case should be put together, sent to the CPS, and the CPS should decide whether it's going to prosecute it. And frankly, if the CPS say, I'm sorry, there's not enough evidence here to secure a conviction, then they've looked at the evidence and decided that it's not good enough. It doesn't prove, it won't convince a jury.
And maybe that's a good time to segue onto the area here where you've got the 21 times domestic abuse, etc., 62% family court cases claim. Can you explain that little sort of triangle there? Are they all related?
Yeah, so I looked at the prevalent. I looked at how many reports were being made to the police nationally, and I looked also at the ONS figures for domestic abuse across the entire population or the relevant age groups, and then I looked at the volume of parents that are in family court, and I looked at the data that CAFCAS and Women's Aid produced, or the report that they produced, where they made an assumption. Well, it's not an assumption. They did an estimation that 70% of cases in family court, private law cases, have allegations of domestic abuse or violence. Now, I actually think that that's a low estimate. I think it's probably quite a way over that. Pushing around the 90% figure. Right. I think they probably wouldn't be in family court if there weren't one of the parents saying the other parent has been a bad parent in some way. Anyway,
you could only have a legal aid lawyer if there is evidence of domestic violence. So you could almost say that every single person who is defended via legal aid, that case has a element of domestic violence.
Yeah, well, it should. I mean, that's the parameter to get the legal aid. So they should have had been the victim of domestic abuse or violence in order to justify that. But what we find is that when you and the calculations are all in the document that I've written. In that subset of parents that are going into family court, taking the figures that Women's Aid and CAFCAS have produced, the prevalence of domestic abuse is running at 21 times what we're seeing in the population outside of family court. And right. for me, that's unfeasible. Now, an argument would be, well, they're in family court for a reason. And that's all essentially the dregs of society who are beating crap out of each other. And that's just not reasonable to draw that conclusion, because 50% or more of marriages are failing, and that's been the same for decades. So we're essentially saying that you know, while they're together, there's no violence or no abuse, and then when it comes to separating, all of a sudden there's abuse. You know, these people have been together a long time. A lot of them have got, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 children. You know, and all of a sudden there's this massive prevalence of domestic abuse,
and in today's society as well.
Yeah, and also we've got, you know, let's not forget that we've got, you know, we've got fewer reports to the police, you know, than we've had since 2005. Yeah, 30%. That's significant. We've got more funding going into domestic abuse services and into awareness, you know, at a level that's around $500 million a year. And that's been gradually climbing for the last 30, 40 years. So are we saying that all of that investment has led to no improvement? You know, it's led to this instead. Well, if that's the case, well, why have we got domestic abuse reports down 30%? You know, what that 30% drop tells us is that actually that investment has been paying off. And we should be seeing, as a result, we shouldn't be seeing this climb. We should be seeing that fall in line with this arrow. It should all be going down in line with this arrow. Family court should not be going in the other direction. And I could accept, you know, in family court that there will be a higher prevalence. I could accept, you know, it might be 50% higher, maybe even 100% higher, but I can't accept that it's 2,100. You know, get cases in family court where it might be a couple that have come together and each of them have got children from a previous relationship, and one of the parents is now being stopped from seeing the child or children that they've got together, but they're still looking after their other children, and they didn't have a problem in that previous relationship in terms of domestic abuse. You know, it's just in this one, and you know, you've got courts and CAFCAS and what have you making a ruling that a father is dangerous for that child but not for those children, or a mother, you know, and you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. You know, I even watched a video of a case today where this poor guy, you know, he's raised three children single-handed on his own. He's got one with somebody else and he's not seen them for several years, and he's had over 200 allegations made against him, and the court has stopped him seeing, you know, they won't even let him have indirect contact. And you're like, well, this is an oxymoron, you know. How are you saying that I'm a danger to that one, but I'm not a danger to those ones, you know? So you know, really that just fuels the view in me that it's really just a pantomime, you know, and that has another impact. You see, you know, all of this has a cost not only to the people who are on the receiving end, who are going through family court and who might be one of the people that make up this high figure here in terms of being accused of forms of abuse, but this has a wider impact because it accounts for 30% of all police domestic abuse reports, right? For the whole country, right? So, you know, let's say it's about 40 million people, because some would fall out of scope, right? The children below 18, and mostly, and the you know, the very elderly probably falling out of scope. Okay. But for all domestic abuse crime, 30% of that is being generated by 31,000 parents in family court. 30%. And that has a cost, right? Both financial, and in financial terms, it's $500 million a year of the police budget. It's 4% of the police total budget is being wasted on claims of domestic abuse made in family court. But the other side of that fact is that $500 million isn't being spent supporting genuine victims. You know, it's not being spent, you know, having more bobbies on the beat who might, you know, save a life or many lives, or prevent a mugging of an old lady, or, you know, who knows what the effect of that lost resources on genuine victims, or on, you know, a terrorist incident, or, you know, we just don't know. Because we've got this rampant family law industry stealing resources with you know, the silver bullet.
So this is where
what you need to say.
Yeah, this is where it doesn't just affect people who are divorcing. This is where it affects the people who look at the people who are divorcing and going, wish they could just get their shit together. It's affecting them. So the fact that people are going through this system of family court, everybody else outside it, unless they look at it and go, actually, this is something that does affect me as well, indirectly. This is the stat.
Yeah. And I think the police are pretty sick of it, but they're doing a job, aren't they? I mean, the number of times the police have come to see me, and they're telling me they're not going to pursue it, and I make a complaint informally to them, say, look, when are you going to step in and stop this stuff happening? When are you going to, how many times will this happen before you put an embargo on it? And they're like, well, we won't, because at some point you might do what you're being accused of doing, and we don't know, so we can't take that risk. And
you can't get the key to the city.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was the kind of, in a way, the description of why they wouldn't do that. And you're like, well, so that essentially there is no law and order system as far as I'm concerned. I can be accused of anything by anybody, as many times as they like, for their own advantage, and you won't do anything about it, and the family court won't do anything about it, and the Solicitors Regulation Authority won't do anything about the solicitors that are encouraging it. So, where is my law and order that I've paid for, in the taxes when I was, building up my business and paying all the staff's wages and, all the taxes that come with that, and what's my motivation to generate wealth again? Because it's more likely than not that it's going to get used against me, and not just against me, but people that are my friends and relatives. And what really hit me about this figure here, that we went through earlier, and this really was at the heart of what motivated me to really start lifting up stones in this industry and looking underneath, is that when my son has kids, it's more, whilst the chances of this happening to me were high, and I was none the wiser, it's more likely than not that it will happen to him when he has kids, and I'm gonna have to watch it. I'm gonna have to watch him crumble. I had to look at my parents watching me crumble. My mum and dad are in their 80s. My mum has got Alzheimer's, and which maybe is a blessing in some ways. But my dad has watched me, and in the twilight years of their life, and this is happening around the country. Grandparents have no protection from this, and a lot of them are losing their children to suicide as a result of it. Who's fighting for them? Who even cares? Who's even acknowledging it?
Well, the voices that I hear, the sort of, I would describe it as like almost the mutterings of voices who are pro this issue, who are for, like, screams of protest against their reasonable claims of reform. And who is screaming loudest against this, what seems like a well-delivered, well-reasoned, summary of what's going on in the family courts and wider society?
Well, screaming the loudest, no doubt, is the women's movement, Women's Aid, and any charities aligned to it, domestic abuse industry, and the family law solicitors, and the Ministry of Justice are effectively sitting behind them, and making it easy for them. We had the risk of harms review recently. That panel was made up of 8 women and 2 men. One of the men is from Respect, which is a domestic abuse charity that delivers domestic abuse perpetrators programs for men. So they come from the same perspective as Women's Aid. So,
right.
you know, that's not a lot of use. And then the other man was, you know, senior in the Ministry of Justice. So they, you know, obviously they have a career vested interest. And the rest of the panel was all female. There were 2 from women's domestic abuse industry. And, you know, there was no representation for fathers, no representation from any parental alienation groups. The CAFCAS weren't even there. Now, CAFCAS, as you well know, and anyone watching this will know, are the organisation that spends more hands-on time with the children, which is what this is all about, than any other agency there is, right?
Yeah.
By a factor of many multiples. Okay, they didn't have a seat at the table, right? And their position is that parental alienation does exist and it is abuse. And the Risk of Harms Review Panel has concluded that parental alienation doesn't really exist other than as a strategy of abusive fathers to continue abusing the safe parent, mother, and the children of the family. You know, so you know, what else was missing? Who else was missing from that? You know, having any representation? There's no one from the police. There's nobody from education. There's nobody from child psychology. There's nobody from dispute resolution. You know, there's quite a long list of professional experts that should have been there to give some balance. You know, none of the data that was used was collected from the Ministry of Justice's own stores of data about cases. You know, they did not refer to their own data. You know, the data was presented to them by a radical feminist former barrister called Dr. Adrian Barnett, who made her position quite clear over the years preceding this review, that, you know, essentially domestic abuse is gendered, parental alienation is a con, as I've described earlier, and you know, she was hired to do what we call a literature review, which was to pull together all of the available research work around the world that would be helpful for the panelists to be able to arrive at a conclusion about what are the risks of harm to children in family court, and also to the risks of harm to the parent that's taking care of them. And she excluded essentially parental alienation being any form of risk of harm to children. And she essentially cherry-picked the data that would, and the reports and references that would go into this literature review to present to an already partisan panel. And she referenced circular reference back to her own studies that she'd done in years gone by. Now, she was hired by Ministry of Justice to do that report without any due process being followed at all. So they didn't advertise for that role. They didn't interview anybody else. It was just her. You know, she was handpicked. You know, they know what her stance is.
Who's the person that's going to get this through?
Yeah, who do we need who can write what looks like an academic study that can rubber stamp what we want to be rubber stamped, and let's not get any possible other expertise in that could challenge it. And that's what they've done. And, you know, I put in a freedom of information request to find that out, which we could post a link to.
Yeah, definitely.
For the video.
Definitely.
And it shows clearly a breach of process, you know, standard due process that you would expect in something so serious as a risk of harms review, to understand, to look at all of the potential risks of harm to children. And for parental alienation not to be included in that, for CAFCAS not to have a seat at the table, and they were roundly scapegoated in that process, hence why they weren't there. You know, they have for many years described parental alienation as child abuse. So what's going on here? You know.
the irony to that sort of conclusion, or for that kind of narrative, is that parental alienation has affected mothers. Mothers have been on the receiving end of parental alienation, and also when you look at the grandmothers who are of these children who are alienated, like you said, they are being affected. So for a woman's movement to have the audacity of taking that stance is really quite disturbing. And
it's perverse, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
they use this slogan that I see regularly: "No woman turned away." Yeah. They turn their back on these women.
As if they don't suit the narrative, if they're on the wrong side of the, if they're wearing the wrong color.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
And they turn their back on the grandmothers who are affected. So
daughters, the daughters who are being alienated.
Turned away. Yeah, they turn away, exactly. The sisters, the aunts.
Yeah. And that's a really important point, because it's absolutely disgusting and abhorrent to take what is a really noble cause of making sure that women have a voice, making sure that women have equality, true equality in our society, and just slipping all over it and rubbing themselves in money and wealth around pushing that narrative to such a perverse outcome, or ends, as it were. I mean, I spoke with Sally as well, Sally Ann Burris. I've done a video with her. She sort of has parallels and actual intersections with what you're talking about as well here. Certainly with things like the Office of National Statistics and how they generate a number of their how they generate their numbers, really, and in that podcast we touch upon the if you look at a domestic violence case through a man's eyes and a domestic violence case through a woman's experience, and you'll see that there are 6 different touch points for a woman, wraparound services she calls them, all who feed back into the Office of National Statistics. And there's only, if you're lucky, 2. So if you want further information about that, I would say, to watch that video, or look for people like Sally Ann Burris and Split the Difference Community Interest Company, because they're very, very good resources that compound these conversations as well. And the closer that these conversations come together for unification, the better. It will only strengthen that. It will only strengthen that narrative that's here and it's available, but it's being quashed by the visceral screaming of people who are literally feathering their own nests in the name of protecting and helping women.
Well, alarm bells should have been ringing for the whole time, really, because I think in any social issue that needs to be resolved, if one voice is not being heard, i.e. it's being silenced by another voice, then that there's a serious problem. And for government and for Ministry of Justice to be playing an integral part in the silencing of half of the voice, half of the opinion, and even silencing CAFCAS, their own organisation, because it doesn't meet with the story that's being presented by the feminist movement and Women's Aid and what have you. When did Women's Aid become lawmakers?
Yeah.
When were they given that power?
Yeah. When did they supersede the voices that the courts apply for the children, which is CAFCAS?
Yeah. When did they become more expert than CAFCAS? If they are, I'm all open to hearing about it. But when did they become more expert than the court's own appointed experts. And that this dovetails into the domestic abuse bill, where male victims have been silenced, where 7 victims of domestic violence presented in the House of Commons, and no males did. Where in the House of Lords, parental alienation is being silenced again. Where there's a victims commissioner, a London victims commissioner, and a victims commissioner overall, who are tweeting out that for all intents and purposes, over their dead body will parental alienation be recognised as abuse in the domestic abuse bill. And there's statutory positions who are being publicly funded to cause harm to fathers and to children, in my eyes, and prove me wrong. The evidence is there for us to see. There is no resource for men unless it's from a charity, and if that is and where there are charities supporting male victims, they're not supported. There's no government funding. The only government funding into domestic violence, so far as males is concerned, is going to respect into perpetrators programs. Yeah. So I mean, just looking at the ONS stats alone, which don't tell the whole story by a long shot, you're talking at least a third of all victims of domestic abuse are male, and they're getting none of the funding. They have no voice in Parliament. They had no voice in the risk of harms panel. It's and then you've got the violence against women and girls strategy, which is now being claimed to include men and boys. And I don't know if you tried it, but I filled out that survey the other day, and it's appalling.
Oh yeah,
it's a deliberate attempt of government to create the data that they need to make decisions they've already decided to make.
It was disgusting. It was a horrible display of, I mean, you might as well have been, I don't know, just completely naive if you were to ever fill that out and think that you've accomplished something.
Yeah, I mean, I filled it out. Put my camera back on. I filled it out and made my views known.
You're right, in the little boxes provided. Same.
But I dare say that will probably be deleted. And as per the evidence call in the risk of harms, I'm certain that if they're prepared to run these processes in the manner that they're running them, then without any oversight of any independent bodies to make sure that they're not cooking the books, then they're probably cooking the books. Otherwise you would just be transparent, right?
Well, ultimate power corrupts. That's a fact. That has been proven throughout history. Ultimate power corrupts. And at the moment, the hand that rocks the cradle is the one that rules the world, right? And in the family courts, if you are pushed towards having that control over the children, you're going to have the absolute power in that situation. And unfortunately, you're not steered to do what's right by that child. You're steered to do what's right by how you feel about the other person, as opposed to the right thing to do. And that's compounded by evidence that you've shown here, by conversations that I've had with other people, by the family courts and the systems and structures that surround it. It's just
look, I mean, if you
plain to see.
If you can see so many social problems being caused, if you can see the needless drama every single day in every court in the land, if you can see the fact that 99.5% of requests to enforce an order are rejected. This is you're an organization that's sitting on the data that tells you what a shambles and what a mess and how damaging this is, and you're refusing to even put your own data that you've got into a risk of harms review where it would have been so informative, and you have a great number of professionals in your organization whose only job is to collate data. That's all they do, right?
Yeah.
You can't legitimately say that you needed to rely on a radical feminist to do a literature review who you handpicked, right? With no process, no balance, no, if you were going to get a radical feminist in, you might want to balance it with somebody from the parental alienation lobby, all right?
Yeah.
And maybe somebody who has a neutral standpoint, right?
Yeah.
And between the three of them, they can make sure that every relevant piece of literature is included,
yeah.
and you ultimately can arrive at a commentary that's balanced. But they've not done that, and there can only be one reason why, because it's either blind stupidity or it's corruption. And I've yet to meet anybody in family law that I consider to be blind stupid.
Mm. And therein lies the problem, which then begs the question, what are we going to do about it?
So I've written a number of policies that I think would form the basis of sensible family law. And ideally, I'd like to get to a position where the public are able to vote at the next general election on a set of policies, because the public actually have never given they've never given government a mandate for family law the way that it operates today, and they never would. They just simply never would. YouGov did a poll in 2012. You can find a reference to it on the Fathers for Justice website, and it showed an 82% public approval for equal parenting after separation, right? So if that being the case, if the only thing that political parties were campaigning on was whether there should be equal parenting or not, the public would vote for equal parenting at 82% plus. I've run some similar surveys and I got an even higher level than that. But I guess my people that follow me,
we're in the sphere. Yeah.
Yeah. But what was interesting,
it's surprising that you got less than 100%, right?
Yeah, I mean, I did, however, split it down. I did split it down into, and I sent it out wide on Twitter, which is no reliable source, to be fair. But I split it down. Are you a grandparent? Are you a grandmother? Are you a parent? Are you a male parent, a female parent? Are you a male without children? Are you a female without children? And even in the mums, and let's bear in mind that on Twitter I get trolled by lots of radical feminists who would have seen it and they would have voted against equal parenting, just to spite me, right? But the mums with children, it was almost 90% in favour of shared parenting. And grandmothers were almost completely in favour, about 98%, and women without children were about 96%. So I dare say that a lot of women before they have a family who may have seen this growing up and watched this playing out, and ultimately that will have to be the undoing of the system, is all of the kids that go through this one day saying this is unacceptable and we're not tolerating it.
Yeah, I've seen my parents have this.
Yeah, but if you've got a competing force in the domestic abuse lobby who are going into schools and educating the children that fathers are a danger to them, and that is happening, and these types of behaviours constitute abuse, which if you look at the freedom program, which is a whole other rat's nest to get into. You know, for me, that's victim procurement as well. You know, if a psychologist looked at that, I think they'd be deeply worried that is being put forward as a therapeutic intervention of any kind, and that's now being pushed into schools. So, you know, my great worry is what children will leave school believing, and what young boys are being indoctrinated with, and where that might end up. And I'm also really worried. So I showed you that stat earlier about 88% of divorcing parents going into family court. Yeah. Actually, I might have another diagram here. Actually, I have got a couple of charts I'll show you. Because this is important, actually. Yeah. So when I broke down that data, let me try and find it. Okay, so do you see these two charts here?
Yeah.
So on the left-hand side here, this one, this is this data comes from CAFCAS, and this is the ages of children in their private family law cases. So you can see going along the bottom of the graph here, under 1 years old, 2 years, and so on. And you can see this is the peak 16 of plus, the age. Yes. So essentially, you know, it's here that's the peak. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if you separate as parents here, ages, you know, the children are aged 3 to 8, 9, then you are 99% certain to end up in family court battling over your children. Now, when those children get to 10, 11, 12, it's falling off a cliff. Why is that? Well, children of this age group are far easier to manipulate, right?
Yeah.
You know, a parent can,
yeah,
you know, they're totally dependent. They're totally dependent. They haven't really found much independence at that point. Now, if you separate at this point and the kids are, 10 onwards, they're becoming much more their own little human beings at that time.
Yeah.
And we all know by the time they're 12, 13, they think they know everything, right?
That's right.
So you try and oust a parent out of a child's life when they're 10, 11, 12, 13. You've got very little. Yeah, I mean, it happens, right? Clearly it happens. But you've got much less chance of getting away with it.
And it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. It's not as clean cut as what you can do earlier.
Yeah. They're gonna push back a lot, right?
Yeah.
So there's that, but there's also they're not as valuable, right? So when in this age group, right, the children are still very valuable because there's a lot of years left where the parent that ends up with care can get a high maintenance settlement and monthly payments through CMS, and probably get most or all of the property, right? But as that goes down and the children get older, the timeline as to how valuable, how much they can exploit that is dwindling, and lawyers know this, so they're going to focus on their cases that are here primarily. That they're the ideal. If you're a family law solicitor, you want cases where the children are between 3 and 8.
Yeah. If you're a family law solicitor, the first question they ask you is the name and age of the children.
Yeah. So then, but what's really important, right, is, I wanted to know, well, what are the ages of children in all parents that are getting divorced? Because the other thing that leaps out to me is, well, if domestic abuse is so prevalent, are you telling me that people stop abusing their children when they get to this age, mostly, or their partners when the children get to this age?
Yeah.
Why are they only abusing them in this age group? Well, that doesn't make sense, all right? And then, wanted to look at what are the ages of children of separating parents. So if you go to the ONS data, it's a flat line. The parents aren't just divorcing mostly at this time. They're separating pretty uniformly from the ages of 4 or 5 onwards. Yeah.
Right.
It doesn't really change. That's pretty flat line, right? But what's also interesting, right? As I've shown in the diagram before, this is going back to 2010-11 down here. Hold on, just here, and this is the latest year, yeah. So,
okay.
You've seen that going up, and yet the reverse is true here, yeah. So this is the earliest year, and that's the rate falling. So the available stock, if you like, if you look at this as a shop, right, the available stock is depleting, but the sales of the stock are skyrocketing. Demand for that stock is skyrocketing. It just doesn't make sense.
No. I mean, it yes, although it makes sense, it doesn't ring true to what we're seeing through these systems.
Yeah, I mean, it can't, it's not feasible that it's because of skyrocketing domestic abuse, because if that were the case, then, this figure up here, that wouldn't be down 30%, that would be up, 300%.
Yeah. Yeah. Or 21 times. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, yeah, precisely. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a lot of correlation between those two. If they were true, it just doesn't make sense that they're at polar opposites to each other.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the beauty of the data. I mean, it's not like it's something I can manipulate. This is coming from official public bodies data collection, and that's why Ministry of Justice data would be so valuable, and why it's a crime in itself that they are not routinely broadcasting it and reporting on it, almost on a daily basis, as an ongoing, how are we doing? There's in today's world, technical world, there's no excuse for it. They could be collecting, they're collecting vast reams of data as it is, but they could be collecting things in a much clearer and more transparent manner as just, electronic forms when you're applying for the process, and what the outcomes are. And then a check-in with schools, perhaps, 6 months after, a year after, 2 years after. There are key indicators that you could be collecting relatively easily, from GPs, from, other support services. But it's not difficult stuff. They've got the resources to do it. And it seems to me that it's a conscious choice not to apply those and to cover up what they do have. It would be almost a dream come true to be given access to that.
Yeah.
But I won't hold my breath. But you asked what do we do about it? And for me, the key, the number one biggest contributor would be, first of all, to have a presumption of shared parenting that's rebuttable, of course, for to cover reasons why it genuinely should be rebutted, and it should be something else. We all know what they are. And also to set a system up that essentially is very clear about what the outcomes will be. If we determine that this is the outcome and that there is no domestic abuse, this is what the arrangement is going to be, and this is how finances are going to be settled. We are going to, as a system, make sure we're going to do our bit to make sure that both parents can be in as well a functioning space as possible, because they're the people the state rely on to raise those children, right?
Yeah.
They say it takes a village to raise a children to raise a child, And here they are chucking out half of the village around those children and allowing chaos into their lives. So is there any real wonder, that one, the suicide rate is so high, but two, we're getting so many mental health problems with our children and teens now?
Yeah, there's definitely a correlation there. So a better scrutiny on the allegation through the domestic violence part of the process, you feel would be that compounded with a more definite structured outcome, i.e. 50% parenting. So if the outcome was 50% parenting, but the only objection to that was allegations of domestic violence, it would go hand in hand with a more scrutinized or a higher bar raising on the allegations.
Well, I think, look, if there's a serious allegation, it shouldn't be being dealt with in a family court. It's not a family court matter. It's a criminal matter. If they're saying that, a parent has, been physically violent towards a child or sexually abused them, or the same to the other parent, then that has to be assessed as a criminal matter. So it shouldn't even be in family court until that's happened. And they should just refuse to hear those, frankly. If there is evidence that that's happened, then the hearing shouldn't be taking place, because there needs to be a judge and a jury to determine that.
Because
there needs to be a fair trial. Yeah. Right.
Oh, sorry, what I was going to say.
I was just going to say, if the president of the family division wrote to all parents tomorrow that are involved in family court now and said, right, we are going to treat any allegations of abuse that are made at family court as a criminal matter, all right, and we'll be referring them all to the Crown Prosecution Service. This is your opportunity to withdraw your claims. If you wish them to go forward and they're found to be untrue, then anybody putting them continuing may suffer the consequences of being charged with perjury. I guarantee you 70% of cases will just pull out overnight. They won't take that risk.
No.
That there's going to be a consequence for making those allegations.
Well, that's right. Happen. And I was going to say that that
would be a good start.
Well, I was going to say the crux of the matter is not based on their perception of you as a partner or what have you. So if there was allegations towards the actual other partner saying that there was violence, domestic violence, etc., or sexual violence, in the family courts, another measurement, well, the measurement or focus should be, or is professed to be, towards the child. So your ability to parent that child independently of that relationship. So, there's no measurements around, or there's a sort of a pseudo measurement around your ability to be in a relationship with this person is directly correlating to your ability to parent the child that you're looking for.
Yeah. Which kind of, most people I talk to, and looking at my own experience, the majority of the allegations that were made against me, absolutely, totally irrelevant. One, they weren't true, but even if they were true, they got absolutely nothing to do with parenting, nothing whatsoever.
Yeah.
So why are they even there? Why are they even being entertained? It's just intimidation, really, and smearing. So these are things that should be raising alarm bells anyway. Why is MOJ not saying to solicitors, you need to not be putting forward from your client allegations that have got nothing to do with raising children? Some of the allegations I've seen, like money laundering, right? Well, okay. If I happen to be a money launderer, right, that's not very good, but it doesn't mean I can't be a good parent. I'm not a money launderer, right? But it's ridiculous that an allegation like that, would make it into family court, as an example. And I've seen some, helping other people out, I've seen some truly ludicrous allegations being made that should be doing only one thing, and highlighting that the person making those allegations is lying. And if they're lying,
no accountability there, is there?
They're probably being harmful to the children, because they're preventing a good parent, a good safe parent, from parenting those children when those children need both parents. Biologically, they need that. And they're hardwired.
And you could argue that these are the same people that met the partner of their dreams, fulfilled those dreams by having children, and then all of a sudden turned into these monsters through, you could say that there are some people who are just sort of predisposed to acting like that and flipping, or there was a system that was already set up with a playbook that takes you and runs you through this process in the best way they know how it works, in the best way that they can get you the outcome that they want, which is what Sally Ann Burris was saying in the other podcast, where women are treading on top of women to get to different places. So you've got these charities saying, we will do the best for you. We lobby these MOJs, we basically are the people who they appoint to write their reports and to deliver their programs, and to advise them on family court matters. So this is how you do it if you want to get that house, and if you want to have those children. Isn't that what you want? And kind of at the point, if you're a female in the divorce proceedings and you've got a little bit of an angst against somebody who, at the moment you've completely fallen out of love with, but you're blinded by your rage, you're going to swallow that pill. You're going to go down that road.
Yeah, I think there's a few things in the dynamic. I think that when you separate, both parents are racked with fear. They're struggling with loss, at least one of them. But the fear can grab hold of them, and they can behave in a way that they otherwise wouldn't do. So in that moment of fear and potential loss, all it takes is for a family law solicitor to say, well, what if they do this? Well, what if they try and take the kids from you? Well, if you don't do this, you might not have enough money to live on. But if you do this, we can get you more. Well, they would probably do this to you. That's kind of the sorts of behaviour that happens. Yeah. And it's not motivated because they want to help that parent. It's motivated because they want a client, and they want a client to have a lengthy court hearing, a lengthy case, and they want there to be acrimonious communications, because every email is generating money, right?
Yeah, and they're sucking those resources.
Yeah, if you were running a family law industry for the children, you would cap the cost. You would say, it would be conveyancing. It would be, this is what you get for $5,000, all right? And that is it. And your case is done. Mm-hmm. And that's what, that's exactly, when you buy a house, the house is worth $500,000, your conveyancing is going to cost you $2,000 or whatever it is, and you know what you're getting for it. And there's no need for a war, and there's no need for a war in this, there's, you're separating. It's, it can be formulaic. And, whilst I've watched the video you did with Sally Ann, and, that really enlightened me to some stuff I didn't actually know. And, from there's a particular part after, I think it's an hour and 11 minutes, that's absolute gold. Well, my take on how it's playing out in terms of gender in family court is actually there's two other dynamics that are at play. One is first mover advantage, right? So the parent has probably instigated the divorce or the separation goes to see the solicitor first, and they get the playbook, right? And if they're either lacking in integrity, they're abusive, or they've been frightened enough by the solicitor to behave in a way they otherwise wouldn't, then they get the upper hand very quickly. And once they've got the upper hand, it's almost impossible to overturn that. But the other, and because statistically about 80% of divorces are initiated by mums, right? Well, by women, but mums in respect to family court. But the other part of the dynamic for me is I believe that the court is more inclined to make their decisions in favour of the least financially productive parent, because that will ensure, in all likelihood, that the most financially productive parent will continue to fight and spend money in the system. All right. So what we're seeing is, as a result of that, we're seeing, and this bears out in the groups that I'm in, the mums that I'm coming across who are alienated have very often been the ones who are more financially productive in their marriage or relationship than the dad, right? But the common denominator among all parents who get alienated is that they usually were coercively controlled and possibly, domestically abused far more than that, So the system is essentially working entirely backwards in terms of protecting domestic abuse victims, whilst claiming that it's protecting domestic abuse victims, and it's working entirely backwards in terms of child safety, because in most cases it's leaving children primarily with a parent who is at least emotionally abusive and possibly abusive in other ways too. But much of that happens just because it can. I don't believe that these parents that do behave that way would if they couldn't. They do it because they can. And to give you an analogy, is if you imagine Andrew McFarlane, president of the family division, is actually a bank manager, and he just decides that he's going to leave the doors to the vault open every day, and then he goes, well, I don't know why people keep taking the money out the vault.
Yeah.
Head scratcher. Well, what are they doing that for? Oh, it's a head scratcher. Why are they doing that? I mean, all I did was leave all the money in there and the door open. I don't get it. Come in every day and it's empty.
Weird.
I mean, for me, it's that. It's literally, that's my analogy.
But that's how these people. That's how these people run their departments, and that's how these people just float through. And then when the shit hits the fan for them, or they've decided to resign their position, there'll be something like that. There's no retribution. There's no accountability or responsibility, through these people that just answer these questions by saying, I just don't know. How does that even?
Well, when you're in a position,
don't be a bank manager,
and you're commanding all of the vested interests, and you are on a very, very healthy salary, and you're probably not doing all that much for it. You're just waiting for retirement. You want to keep that going because I think there's a particularly, I don't know what the actual number is, but I was told, and I haven't verified it, I was told that around about 90% of family court judges are also partners in law firms. So you're going to want to keep, if you're working in family as a judge, you're going to want to keep your partnership, that's bringing in additional income for you, nice and lucrative, aren't you? So
when does that
you're not going to be motivated to start protesting.
Find out if that is the case, Brian. That'd be very good to understand.
I did put in an FOI, but they refused it.
Oh. Well, it's a bit of a head scratcher, isn't it? I wonder why they'd refuse. I wonder why they'd refuse that. That's bizarre, isn't it? Oh well, we'll move on, shall we? Flipping it.
Yeah. So we talk about secret family court, and that is something that is not justifiable in terms of keeping it secret. It is justifiable not to have children's names plastered all over the press, and it is justifiable to ask parents not to spill the beans all over social media about their case, right? That's fair, right? Any reasonable person would agree with that, but it's not acceptable for Ministry of Justice to obscure the data that they're sitting on.
That's got to be one of the big messages of this podcast, certainly. So where do we I mean, one of the things that we've sort of discussed offline was around, and you alluded to it earlier, we've got lots and lots of different groups. We're battling against the lobbyists, etc., through Women's Aid and the other sort of charities that are pushing a sort of a pseudo-feminist agenda through the family courts, etc., through the justice system around domestic violence and what have you. How do we move a comparable group to oppose that status quo that they've got there?
Okay, so if you look at Women's Aid, so far as I can see, their sort of structural model is Women's Aid it's like a mothership that sits above all of these other localized charities, which all federate to Women's Aid Federation of England, right? So Women's Aid itself brings in about 15 million that it operates itself on, but those 180 and ever growing local charities seem to have funding ranging from about 1 million up to 15-20 million, and they'll be delivering services locally, and those services will be things like independent domestic violence advisors who will advocate for people claiming to be victims of domestic abuse and what have you, and the same for sexual violence. And I mean, there's a range of services that they provide, including refuges and what have you. And for me, that's actually the perfect approach. Is what's missing on this side of the debate is that mothership, or perhaps a better term would be a equal parenting ship, right? Where it's it's like a unified so that would be an equal parenting ship on this side of the lobby, if we're using more friendly terminology. And so where Women's Aid have got those 180 odd charities, there's nowhere near that many on this side of the lobby, but they're all running autonomous from one another. They've all got their own views. They may have their own specialisms. They might be delivering services locally to a particular demographic, but they could be brought in under this umbrella, and then the umbrella organisation is essentially responsible for attracting funding in and creating projects that the federated organisations could apply for funding to deliver. Women's Aid as the mothership doesn't really have that much resource. It relies on bringing in funding and pushing projects out to local organisations, and that's how they get things done. And I think if they didn't do it that way, they would try to do it under one big organisation, they'd probably be fighting every day. And we certainly see that sort of thing happening over here. There's a lot of there's perhaps some big egos. There's differences of opinion. There's people that don't like to be told what to do, and that's okay. Why not have a similar structure that allows them to be autonomous, deliver the things that they're passionate about, that they're experienced in, and that they've built perhaps an infrastructure to deliver, and find a way to maximize what they can deliver to that niche or to that local area by defining, them applying, saying, this is a project we want to deliver. We think it's going to cost this much. It's going to deliver this value. This is how we're going to report it back to you. This is how it will benefit everyone. And they could then, make an application for funding, and vice versa. The umbrella organisation, I've written about 30 different projects I'd like to see delivered. Maybe that umbrella organisation say, well, here's the list of the projects that we want delivered. This is the budget set aside. Tell us what you can deliver for that budget, and what track record have you got? And I think then we would start to see things moving, and as projects are being delivered and we're seeing what social value they're delivering, and we're reporting off that gives us the reason to be able to go to funding bodies and say, well, we did this project and look at the value that delivered. We want to do the same one over here, or we want to expand on that one, and it's going to need this much funding. Will you help with that? And the same is true if you're going to attract members. In every year now in family court, there's more than 50,000 cases. So that means that there's 50,000 potential new members to an organisation who would, should be up for paying a small subscription to get lots of value back, to be part of that community, and to reach out in that moment of desperate need, to be able to find resources that are really well put together that can really help them in that moment, and maybe it be a safety net. We're seeing crazy levels of suicide, and we're seeing crazy levels of mental health issues and depression and anxiety that they're going to doctors with, and being prescribed drugs and taking time off work. We've got employers don't know really what some of these people are going through, and they'll lose focus at work, and they might end up getting disciplined for it. Whereas really their employer needs to be educated to be able to put a safety net in place for those people, and for the employer to be able to say, to know that they can reach out into this organisation and find services that are appropriate for that person at that time. So that's kind of a rough idea of the kind of vision that I've got for how things will evolve on this side of the debate.
Yeah, well, you make a compelling argument for it, because normally when you see such programs where you have somebody who's got a number of opinions, okay, it's very rare that they're able to say, well, here's what I'm going to do about it. Here's what I want to do about it. You could say, well, do you know what? And then it's very easy to be sort of coated as just somebody who hates women, right? If you didn't have anything else to add to this podcast, it would be quite reasonable for somebody to say, it's just a bloke with a chip on his shoulder. But the fact that you put in such depth of knowledge, and there's throughput in regards to your ideas around these unifications, etc., or how you see the bigger picture working, to me only just adds more authenticity to the podcast, to this conversation, to the plight of many. One thing I will add, though, is that process comes with another caveat, because where we see the fractured organizations who are sort of looking for these types of solutions, very often they're loaded with just that, solutions. And the solution to this problem is erasing the problem, is rethinking the problem, and not having to provide solutions around the outcomes of what a really disturbed organization, provides or drops into society, to go into a forum and say, I really need help because I'm struggling here to make sense of what's happened to me through the family courts. So would you say it was fair to have a that part of an organization that federates everybody is actually one that would like to see the problem disappear and its relevance then no longer needed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's got to be the ultimate goal. We shouldn't need to be here. I would like to think that within 5 years, I wouldn't need to be involved in any of this stuff, and that the job's done. I think in reality there will be work coming out of anything like that for many years after. I mean, if you were able to reform family law in a way that I've described earlier tomorrow, one of the massive tasks you've got to do is try and reunify all of these kids and their parents over the last however many years who have been, perversely have had their relationships severed or seriously damaged. There's a lot of work to be done there.
So there's a real need for deep psychological child and parental therapy processing to be sort of designed and implemented and put forward.
There might be. I don't know. I think in a lot of cases, I think it's probably easier to reunify than people would imagine, and I think we can cloud it by, trying to over-engineer therapeutic intervention.
I think you're right, actually. I think you're right.
No doubt.
Once kids see that their parents.
In some cases you need that. Yeah. No doubt. In some cases you would need that help, but I think in most, children just retain a yearning. It's hardwired, as do parents. You're bonded. And that's that. So I think that would be an easier task in terms of therapeutic intervention. I think you would need to involve schools, colleges, and education big time, and that would be the place to deliver some form of initial, preparatory work, and that may take a number of years to deliver, but I think that ultimately I would like to see it being possible to step away after perhaps 5 years. But I think the reality, from what I'm seeing that's happening with regards to what the MOJ is doing in terms of cementing their position and growing their business, and the same can be said of the domestic abuse industry, and how the DA bill has been manipulated, and how the risk of harms process has been manipulated. We have to expect this is going to get worse, probably a lot worse, before it gets better. And therefore, part of making it better is sitting back and saying, okay, we know that they're going to do this. We know that we're probably going to be immediately unsuccessful in preventing that. We know there's going to be a lot more harm. There was already a lot of harm. What can we do now as a damage limitation exercise? And what can we do now in terms of putting safety nets in place for the poor bastards that are coming in this year and next year and the year after? That's really what I think has to be an urgent focus. How are we going to stop? The work that I've done on the child maintenance service, I've identified over 1,000 parental suicides being driven by that organisation alone. I think there's the same number again as a result of family court and parental alienation. What could we be doing that could cut that dramatically? I think there's a lot that we could be doing. We shouldn't have to do it, but the reality is that we're going to have to, because for each of those parents that take their own lives, there's probably 2 children, and every suicide deeply affects at least 6 people. There's a massive economic impact. The social impact is huge, and no one's giving them support. There's just no one's doing it. And we can learn a lot from doing it, and we can reach them. We can reach them before it gets too desperate. And also, for every one that commits suicide, there's 50 more who are on their knees. I mean, literally on their knees. And they're not committing suicide, perhaps, down to either their own resilience or they're lucky enough to have a great support network who are putting lots of support around them, but they need help too, and they're getting dragged into it, and it's dragging them down, and it's affecting lots of people around them. It's affecting businesses, it's affecting colleagues, it's affecting industry. You've got sometimes critical key players in businesses making really bad decisions because they're a mess. Right? I watched a video yesterday, actually. It's a chap who runs an organization called Justice for Troops, and he was a commander in the military, and he had to cancel a mission because one of the senior flight engineers was a complete mess due to the behavior of the child maintenance service. He's canceling a critical military mission, right?
That's how far-reaching it is.
But that was a good decision because this guy was critical in the mission and the flight, which was carrying maybe 30 servicemen. So he's made that call that I'm not risking all of those service personnel lives.
Yeah.
We're not taking that back to the source and doing anything about the source. And that's an example of an individual who has cottoned on that actually I need to put a safety net in place here and I can't take those risks. Now, in industry, we could start reaching out to, the boards of major employers and be saying, look, you need to be aware of what's going on here because it won't just be affecting that person, it will be affecting their team. And if it's affecting their team, it's affecting the entire business. And if it's affecting those people, it might even be affecting customers of your business, and that could lead to issues that bring your business down. That's how these things ultimately are all connected. The tentacles go everywhere, and somebody pushes the domino over, and it can be game over. That's essentially what led to my bankruptcy. The dominoes were pushed over, and I ran to try and save it and get into the very last domino.
Yeah.
But it just became impossible. I don't think there's anybody. If we were to get everybody in the country to watch this video, I don't think there'd be many people that couldn't think, yeah, I know that's going on with that person in my business or at work, or that person in my school. It's touching everybody in some way.
Yeah.
They don't think, it's not right front and center, and ultimately that's a failing of everybody who's on this side of the debate. Is nobody has successfully made it front and center, and the campaigning that there has perhaps been the wrong type to really capture the hearts and minds of enough people, and it's been rather easy for the opposing side to then just ridicule it as, oh, they're just angry dads, they didn't get their way, or it's an example of how abusive they are, the fact that they climbed up a Buckingham Palace or whatever it may be, in Batman outfits. And just imagine how unstable they must be around those children, so they've kind of been fed exactly the ammunition they needed in order to discredit all the prior efforts. And I don't think so anything going forward needs to bear in mind that everything that we try to do to campaign against what they are doing will be twisted into something that it isn't, will be fired back at us. So in the meantime, what we can do is focus a lot of attention on saving some souls, being really supportive to one another. Let's not forget, all these people caught up in this have probably been pretty damn productive in their life. There must be a way to put a safety net in place and galvanize what they can bring to the table. So as a community, we're all working to the same goal, and we're all helping each other be the best versions of ourselves, and that's all headed in one direction. And we can find ways to undermine the damaging intent that we're faced by in a smart way.
Yeah, I think that's a good call to arms for that. We definitely have to sort of rally those people, those industry leaders who have found themselves at the receiving end of this, and let them refocus, re-energize their efforts into a really, really good cause, and see what it can grow into.
Yeah, there are a lot of wonderful people out there, and a lot of them are willing to give time. And I'm very welcome to have contact from any of those, who think that they've got something powerful to offer here. Time, funding, resources, business resources that they can help to apply, reach to people that might need help. It's going to take some time to galvanize all this into something really well functioning, but we've got to start with anybody who might be watching this or anything similar to start thinking actually this needs to be something they play part in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that is a call to arms. Anybody who's out there who has any, we're talking anything, right? We're talking managing director down to data entry, down to any expertise or what have you, because at some point, an organization will have to get organized, right? And we're going to have to, you're going to have to categorize people as to what they can do and where they can help. And everybody else is going to have to chip in. Everybody else is going to have to chip in. Say that again, sorry.
Yeah, hopefully it won't all be down to me, but you look at what. Do
you like the way I'm sort of like going, well, it's you now. It's you, Brian. It's us. It's us. I'm right behind you on that. I'm right behind you on that.
Yeah. Well, if you look at what Extinction Rebellion has achieved with a completely flat structure and approach, they've raised funds. Whether you agree or disagree with what they have done, they've been very effective. Right? That's the reality. They've inspired a lot of people, and they've got a lot of people to take action. So it can be done, and there are.
They're being invited to the conversation. They're being invited to the conversation, and that's I think that would be like almost mission accomplished to just be invited to the conversation.
We if we get a seat at the table, that's the first step, and I think that we can create enough momentum to make that an inevitability, because it's criminal that we haven't had a seat at the table. It's on a number of levels, and we can take charge of that in terms of the destiny of this lobby movement, and in the meantime we can we can fill the gaps. What is it Barack Obama says? Be the change you wish to see in the world, and we aren't. That's the reality, is we aren't. We're doing a lot of talking, but we're not doing much doing. So that's what I'd like to see change.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Brian, I think we've covered off as with so many of these podcasts like this, we've done circa 2.5 hours of conversation around this, and we're still sitting above the issue in regards to detail wise. It's going to take more conversation, it's going to take more outreach, etc., to actually get in that street level and have a look and see what's going on in those little nitty-gritty places, as it were. But how can people contact you? How can people find out more about what you're doing, and like keep in touch, subscribes, and?
Well, I'm pretty active on Twitter, so that's probably the best place to go. My handle you can put in the comments, but also it's at Brian Hudson 3333. And I have a website called stopcmsdrivingsuicide.org, and I have a Facebook page called CMS Suicide. So that through any of those mediums, I can be contacted, or perhaps leave some comments on here, and I might check them out. I'm not difficult to find. I'm on LinkedIn as well. Look me up on LinkedIn.
That'd be fantastic, and I would obviously encourage everybody to have a look at what's going on with Brian, and I certainly am going to keep in touch with you. I think we've got more to explore with this series of podcasts around injustice in the family courts. I think it's an important message, and this podcast in itself will probably warrant its own edition as opposed to being part of a series. I think it's really important that it just comes out. So I'll be endeavouring to put this out as soon as possible. With that said, is there anything else you'd like to go over now with me and discuss?
No, I'm sure there'll be future opportunities. We can talk about some other related topics in a bit more detail.
Yeah, definitely. Brian Hudson, thank you for taking part in the Philip Maloney podcast.
My pleasure. Great. Thanks, Philip.
On a train, in a bus, in a car, on the way to your job. All alone with your kids, with your wife, or with your dog. You can listen anywhere. You can listen everywhere. To the Philip